You spend all day feeling exhausted. And then, the moment your head touches the pillow, your brain decided it's time to wake up. That makes no sense. If you're tired, you should sleep, right? But what if the real reason you can't sleep has nothing to do with sleep? What if your brain is doing exactly what it was trained to do? And what if the thing keeping you awake is something most sleep experts barely talk about? Now, stay with me, because by the end of this video, I'll show you a hidden effect of city living that changes how you understand sleep, stress, and even your personality. And once you see it, exactly. It's funny. Most people, they think that a city makes life easier. Everything is close, everything is available, everything moves faster. But have you ever noticed something strange? You can spend an entire day almost doing nothing physically and still feel completely drained. You wake up, you check your phone, traffic, messages, people, noise, notifications, deadlines, screens, more screens. Then finally, you get home. You sit down, nothing dangerous is happening. Nobody's chasing you. Nothing is on fire, but your body is still waiting as if something needs to happen. And most people, they call this stress. But I don't think that's the whole story. Because stress sounds temporary. A difficult day, a bad meeting, a financial problem, then recovery. But what if recovery never really starts? The strange part is that many people living in cities aren't experiencing constant stress. They are experiencing constant monitoring, and those are not the same thing. Think about it. Every day your brain is checking thousands of things. The traffic light, the train schedule, the email, the message, the social cue, the stranger walking behind you, the news, the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. Most people, they don't even realize they're doing it because it feels normal. But normal doesn't mean harmless. Here's the first belief I want to challenge. People, they think that exhaustion comes from doing too much. Not always. Sometimes exhaustion comes from monitoring too much. A security guard sitting in front of 20 screens isn't running a marathon, but by the end of the day, he's exhausted. Why? Because attention costs energy, and modern cities, they ask for attention almost every second. Now here's where the thing gets interesting. You probably think that sleep is supposed to fix all of this. Sleep is important, of course it is. But sleep is not a magic eraser, because your nervous system doesn't switch state like you switch off the light. It switches like a cargo ship, slowly, very slowly. And if you spend 12 hours scanning, predicting, reacting, comparing, and preparing, your brain doesn't suddenly forget all of that because it's 11 p.m. right now. In fact, for many people, the first quiet moment of the day happens in bed. And that's when everything shows up. The thoughts, the worries, the replaying, the planning, the random memories, the strange feeling you can't explain. Most people, they think they're overthinking. Maybe, but maybe something else is happening. Maybe your brain is finally processing what it had never time to process during the day. Because all day long it was busy surviving noise. Not danger, noise. And there's a difference. Here's another modern belief worth questioning. People, they think that burnout comes from working too hard. Sometimes it does. But I've met people that were working fewer hours and they felt worse than my grandparents did. They felt more overwhelmed than ever. How is that possible? Because workload and information load are not the same thing. Your grandfather probably wasn't exposed to hundreds of headlines, alerts, opinions, advertisements, messages, videos, notifications. Before breakfast, I don't think that happened. You are, every single day. And your nervous system has to process all of it. Even the things you think you're ignoring. Now, let me give you a concept that helped me understand this differently. I call it the invisible crowd. Because even when you're alone, you're often surrounded by thousands of psychological signals, opinions, expectations, news, comments, comparison, algorithms, messages, trends. Your body may be sitting alone, but your nervous system feels crowded. And crowded systems don't relax easily. And just to be clear, I'm not anti-city. Not at all. Actually, there are things I generally love about it. I love the energy, the movement, the feeling that something is always happening. Sometimes I even enjoy walking through a busy street or seeing people, hearing different languages, feeling that pulse of life around me. But over the years, I start noticing something. The city version of me and the nature version of me weren't exactly the same person. My thoughts were different. My breathing was different. My attention was different. Even my sleep was different. Not dramatically, just enough to make me curious. And once I started paying attention, I realized something I wish someone had explained to me when I was younger. Your environment is not just shaping your schedule, it is shaping your nervous system. And your nervous system is shaping almost everything else. And that's why most sleep advice, most of the time, feels disappointing. The advice itself isn't always wrong. The problem is that it often treats sleep like a mechanical problem. Do this, avoid that, take this supplement, buy this gadget, follow this routine. And now even AI can generate thousands of sleep tips in a second. The problem though, most of those answers are built around behavior, not state. Behavior matters, but state comes first. Because if your nervous system still feels like it's navigating traffic or deadlines, noise, uncertainty, and constant stimulation, then adding another sleep hack is a bit like putting fresh paint on a car while the engine is still overheating. It looks useful, but it doesn't solve the deeper issue. And that's why the solution I'm talking about isn't another supplement. It's not another app. It's not another bedtime ritual. It's learning to notice what state your body is carrying before you ever reach the pillow. Most people, they try to fix sleep at night. The real work often starts much earlier. Sometimes even with 5 minutes of actual silence. Sometimes with a walk that has no destination. Sometimes by removing stimulation instead of adding another solution. Simple things. Not because they're magical, but it gives your nervous system something that it rarely receives anymore. Proof that the day is actually over. I remember noticing this years ago. I could spend a day in the city, meet nobody, do nothing dramatic, no crisis, no emergency, yet at night I felt strangely wired. Almost like my brain had been in a conversation all day. Eventually, I realized something. It wasn't the work, it wasn't the distance traveled, it wasn't even lack of sleep. It was the amount of input, the amount of scanning, the amount of invisible engagement. And once I started paying attention to that, a lot of things began making sense. Not just sleep, focus, mood, patience, motivation, even relationships. Because when your nervous system never really fully decompresses, everything starts feeling heavier than it actually is. And here's the deeper layer that no one is actually talking about. The city doesn't just affect your sleep. It can slowly change what feels normal. You adapt. You become used to the noise, used to urgency, used to interruption, used to constant stimulation, used to always being reachable. And then something strange happens. Silence starts feeling uncomfortable. Stillness feels boring. Doing nothing feels wrong. Not because it is wrong, because your system forgot how to trust it. And that might be one of the most biggest hidden costs of modern life. Not that we're tired, not that we're stressed, but that we've become unfamiliar with true recovery. And if that's true, then the question isn't, how do I sleep better? The question might be, what is my nervous system carrying into the night that I never noticed during the day? Because the answer to that goes far beyond just sleep. It might explain why you're exhausted, why you struggle to switch off, why vacations sometimes don't help, why weekends disappear so quickly, and why some people, they even move away from the city and suddenly they feel like a different person. Not because they changed, but because the environment stopped asking their nervous system to stay on guard. And that brings us to an even deeper layer, because the city is not the only thing that can train your brain to keep scanning. And that's the part most people never connect. If this made you look at sleep differently, you might enjoy some other of the conversations happening here. This channel isn't really about sleep or anxiety or focus, not directly. It's about understanding the hidden patterns underneath them. The patterns most people feel every day but struggle to explain. If that sounds interesting, explore a couple of my other videos. And if you want to go deeper, you'll find everything connected to MindShiftNexus.com. Because sometimes the symptom isn't the real story, and sometimes the real story starts much earlier than we think.